Karen, the cafe owner, kicks out an elderly black woman, unaware that Shaquille O'Neal is watching every move, an act that will set off a chain of unexpected and life-changing events. The first gunshot was a thunderclap in the small courthouse, sending bodies to the floor and panic through the air. Judge Margaret Maggie Thompson clutched the edge of her bench, heart hammering against her ribs as screams erupted around her. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not today. Not here. "Everyone down!" The bailiff's voice competed with the chaos as the second shot splintered wood inches from Maggie's head. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you are watching us from. We continue. Through the haze of fear, Maggie locked eyes with the shooter, Shaquille Blackwood, the defendant in today's sentencing. His face, once handsome in that weathered, small-town way, was now contorted with rage and something else. Recognition. Not of her as Judge Thompson, but of her as Margaret, the girl who'd left Promise Falls 27 years ago without a backward glance. "You remember now, don't you?" Shaquille's voice cut through the screams, steady despite the gun trembling in his hand. "You remember what you did." The courtroom deputies had their weapons drawn, but Shaquille had positioned himself with hostages, the court reporter and his own attorney, creating a standoff. Maggie forced herself to stand, ignoring the desperate tugs at her robes from her clerk, hiding beneath the bench. In the gallery, reporters and family members cowered behind wooden pews, smartphones capturing what might be the last moments of her life. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her judicial voice, betraying none of the thunderstorm in her chest. "Put down the weapon." "Not until they all know," Shaquille snarled, gesturing the gun toward the packed gallery. "Not until they hear what their Honorable Judge Thompson did. How she left me to rot while she built this perfect life. How she knew I was innocent." The weight of those words pressed against her lungs. 27 years of carefully constructed barriers threatened to collapse around her. Maggie's gaze drifted over the faces watching her, colleagues who respected her, strangers whose lives hung on her decisions, and in the back row, her grandson Darius, here to observe court for a college assignment, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Shaq," Maggie said softer this time, abandoning protocol. "This isn't the way." "It's the only way left," he replied, and for a moment she saw the boy he'd been, earnest, gentle, trusting, the boy she'd loved, the boy she'd betrayed. As the red dots of police snipers' laser sights appeared on the wall behind Shaquille, Maggie made her decision. She stepped down from the bench, hands raised, moving slowly toward him. "Your Honor, don't," the bailiff hissed. But Maggie kept walking, each step carrying the weight of a choice made nearly 3 decades ago. A choice that had allowed her to become Judge Thompson, while Shaquille became inmate 87223. A choice that could end with her blood on the courthouse floor. "You want the truth?" she asked, now just 15 feet from him. "Then let these people go and I'll tell them everything." Shaquille's eyes narrowed, searching her face for deception. The gun lowered a fraction. "Everything?" Maggie nodded, feeling the foundations of her carefully constructed life begin to crumble beneath her. Everything. 27 years earlier, Promise Falls was the kind of town people passed through on their way to somewhere else. For 17-year-old Margaret Mitchell, it was a prison of expectations and limitations. The daughter of the town's only doctor, she was destined for an impressive college, a respectable career, and an eventual return to serve the community that had shaped her. Shaquille Blackwood represented everything her parents warned against. The son of a single mother who cleaned houses for the town's more affluent families, including the Mitchells, Shaquille carried the stigma of his father's abandonment and his family's perpetual financial struggles. But he also carried dreams, bigger than Promise Falls could contain, a restless intelligence that matched Margaret's own, and a smile that made her reconsider every plan she'd ever made. They met in secret at first, in the abandoned boathouse at Miller's Lake, in the back row of the town's single-screen movie theater, in the library where Margaret tutored, and Shaquille pretended to need help with trigonometry. He actually understood better than she did. "We could leave, you know," Shaquille said one summer night as they lay on the hood of his battered Chevrolet. watching meteor showers streak across the sky. Just drive until we find somewhere nobody knows our names or our parents or what we're supposed to become. Margaret laced her fingers through his, imagining the freedom of such an escape. But reality always intruded. Her father's medical connections that would pave her way to Johns Hopkins, her mother's relentless reminders of duty and potential, the weight of being the Mitchells' only child after her brother's death. One more year, she promised. After graduation, we'll figure it out. But they never got that year. On a sweltering August night, 19-year-old Karen Whitmore was found beaten to death behind Decker's Bar, the unofficial boundary between Promise, Fall's respectable businesses and its seedier establishments. Karen, Golden Girl, cheerleading captain, daughter of the town's mayor, had been drinking heavily, celebrating her first year at state. Shaquille was arrested the next morning. He'd been at Decker's that night, had argued publicly with Karen over Margaret, though no one knew they were together. Karen had taunted Shaquille, called him names, suggested Margaret was slumming when she tutored him. Witnesses saw them take the argument outside. When Shaquille came back in 30 minutes later, his knuckles were scraped, and he ordered another beer without making eye contact with anyone. "You have to tell them," Shaquille begged, when Margaret visited him in jail, glass between them, his face already bruised from an incident during processing. "You have to tell them I was with you after I left Karen, that we drove to the lake, that I couldn't have done this." Margaret had gripped the phone so tightly her fingers went numb. She'd been with him, that part was true, but they'd quarreled that night too. Shaquille had been drinking, furious about Karen's taunts, talking again about leaving town immediately. Margaret had refused, and Shaquille had stormed off, disappearing into the darkness around the lake. When he returned an hour later, calmer, apologetic, his hands had been wet. He'd said he'd washed them in the lake to cool off. She'd believed him because she needed to. But now doubt crept in. The time frame matched the coroner's estimate of Karen's death. The bruises on Shaquille's knuckles could have come from more than just punching a tree in frustration, as he'd claimed. "I can't," she whispered, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief. "What do you mean, you can't?" "Maggie, they're saying I could get life. They found Karen's wallet in my truck." Panic edged his voice. "Someone is setting me up. You know me. You know I wouldn't do this." But did she? 6 months of secret meetings, of desperate kisses and whispered promises. Was that enough to truly know someone? To stake her future on their innocence? "My father says I need to stay out of it," she said, the words thick in her throat. "The investigation, the trial, if I get involved, it could affect my college applications, my whole future." Shaquille's face hardened into something she'd never seen before. "Your future," he repeated, the words flat. "What about our future, Maggie? What about the truth?" The truth was muddy, complicated by fear and opportunity. That same morning, Margaret's father had sat her down, explained that family connections had secured her an early admission interview at Johns Hopkins, a lifelong dream. If she came forward as Shaquille's alibi, that opportunity would evaporate. More than that, if there was even a chance Shaquille had done this terrible thing, associating herself with him would destroy everything her parents had built for her. "I'm sorry," she said, unable to meet his eyes. I need time to think." But time wasn't something Shaquille had. The case moved quickly, fueled by the mayor's grief and the town's hunger for justice. No one looked too hard at inconsistencies in witness statements or the curious fact that Karen's expensive watch was never found. Shaquille's public defender, fresh out of law school and drowning in a caseload of 60 similar clients, barely mounted a defense. Margaret never testified. As Shaquille's trial began, she was touring the Johns Hopkins campus, dazzling interviewers with her poise and ambition. When the guilty verdict came down, she was accepting her early admission offer. And when Shaquille was sentenced to 25 years for second-degree murder, Margaret was packing to leave Promise Falls forever. She told herself it was for the best, that even if Shaquille hadn't killed Karen, he'd been heading down a destructive path, that she'd made the rational choice, the only choice a girl with her potential could make. But in the quiet moments before sleep, she remembered Shaquille's face as the bailiff led him away, the betrayal in his eyes cutting deeper than any knife. And sometimes in her dreams, she saw Karen Whitmore too, her accusatory gaze following her as she built her new life on the foundation of her silence. Ms. Mitchell became Judge Thompson, Maggie continued, her voice steady despite the gun, still pointed at her chest, and the stunned silence that had fallen over the courtroom. She buried Margaret from Promise Falls so deeply that even she began to believe that girl had never existed. Darius's face in the gallery was a portrait of confusion, his law textbook clutched against his chest like a shield. Maggie couldn't look at her grandson without her voice breaking, so she focused on Shaquille instead. I built a life based on justice and truth while denying both to you, she admitted. I convinced myself you might have been guilty after all, that my doubts were just a schoolgirl's naivete. I buried the memories of that summer so completely that when your case came before me for parole violation, I told myself the familiarity of your name was just déjà vu. Shaquille's laugh was hollow. Imagine my surprise when I walked into this courtroom 3 months ago and saw you sitting up there in your robes, looking through me like I was a stranger. The gun wavered. 25 years, Maggie. I served every day. Got out last year at 44 with nothing but a GED I earned inside and arthritis from prison labor. No family. My mother died while I was inside. No friends, they all believed. I was a murderer. No future. Who hires a middle-aged ex-con with no work history? The red laser dots danced around Shaquille, multiplying as more tactical officers positioned themselves. Maggie knew they were waiting for a clear shot, for her to move out of the way. Instead, she took another step toward him. And then I violated parole by crossing county lines to visit my mother's grave on her birthday, Shaquille continued, bitterness edging each word. Hauled back into the system, and who's assigned to my case? The Honorable Margaret Thompson, who looked at my file and set the highest bail possible, bail she knew I couldn't possibly make. I should have recused myself, Maggie acknowledged, the admission burning her throat. But I was afraid of questions, of exposure, of losing everything I've built. You think I care about your career? Shaquille spat. I cared about the truth then, and I care about it now. Karen Whitmore's real killer has been walking free for 27 years because you were too cowardly to speak up. The sound of Darius's voice cut through the tension. Grandma, he called from the gallery, standing now despite the deputy, trying to keep him down. What is he talking about? Maggie felt tears threatening. Darius, please. Your grandmother let an innocent man go to prison rather than risk her precious future, Shaquille answered, eyes still locked on Maggie. She knew I didn't kill Karen Whitmore, but her silence put me away for half my life. Is that true? Darius's voice cracked. Before Maggie could answer, the courtroom doors burst open. A tactical team began to enter, weapons raised. Shaquille's attorney, who had been cowering beside him, made a break for safety. In the commotion, Shaquille grabbed the court reporter, positioning her as a shield. It's over, Shaq, Maggie pleaded, seeing the desperation in his eyes. Don't make it worse. Worse than 25 years for something I didn't do, he asked, backing toward a side exit, the terrified court reporter stumbling alongside him. Worse than watching you sit in judgment of me pretending you didn't. Know exactly who I was. I can fix this, Maggie said, following cautiously, aware of the officers tracking their movement. I can tell the truth now. About everything. The great Judge Thompson admitting she perjured herself by omission. Shaquille laughed bitterly. Sacrificing her reputation to clear my name after the damage is already done. Too little, too late. Maybe, she conceded, but it's all I have to offer. For a moment, something shifted in Shaquille's expression. A flicker of the boy who'd once dreamed beneath meteor showers, who'd believed in possibilities beyond Promise Falls. Then the court reporter twisted suddenly in his grip, throwing him off balance. A shot rang out, not from Shaquille's gun, but from a tactical officer's. Shaquille crumpled to the ground, blood blooming across his shoulder, his weapon skittering across the floor. Maggie was at his side in an instant, pressing her hands against the wound as officers swarmed around them, securing the scene. Always. Trying to save yourself, Shaquille murmured, his face grey with pain. "Not this time," Maggie replied, keeping pressure on his shoulder despite officers trying to pull her away. "This time, I'm telling the truth, no matter what it costs me." As paramedics rushed in and Shaquille was loaded onto a stretcher, Maggie rose on shaky legs. The courtroom was in chaos, reporters shouting questions, officers securing the scene, her colleagues staring in disbelief. Through the crowd, she found Darius's face, tear-streaked and bewildered. 2 hours later, Maggie sat in the district attorney's office, her judicial robes replaced by clothes stained with Shaquille's blood. She'd given her statement to authorities, admitted to withholding information that might have exonerated Shaquille all those years ago. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. "You understand the gravity of what you're confessing to," District Attorney Marcus Finch said, recording device between them. He'd been a first-year ADA when she was appointed to the bench 15 years earlier. Now he looked at her like she was a stranger. "I do," Maggie replied. "I'm also prepared to resign from the bench, effective immediately." "That's the least of your concerns," Marcus said, his voice professionally detached. "Depending on how the investigation proceeds, you could face charges yourself." The door opened, and Darius entered, his face drawn. Maggie had called him after giving her statement, asking him to come. She needed her grandson to hear the truth from her, not from news reports or courthouse gossip. "You lied," Darius said simply, remaining standing even when Marcus offered him a chair. "All those lectures about integrity and justice, they were just words to you." "No," Maggie said firmly. "They're everything to me. That's why I have to do this now." "After a man nearly died trying to force the truth out of you?" Darius's voice rose. "That's not integrity, Grandma. That's self-preservation. Just like before." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Maggie had raised Darius after her own daughter had struggled with addiction problems, consequences of a troubled childhood, with a mother haunted by guilt. She'd built her career on being tough but fair, on seeing the humanity in even the most hardened defendants. She taught Darius that justice sometimes required difficult choices, but never at the expense of truth. And all along, she'd been living her greatest lie. "You're right," Maggie admitted. "I've been running from this for so long that I convinced myself it wasn't real, that I didn't really know whether Shaquille was innocent. But I did know. I've always known." Darius finally sat, his posture rigid. "What happens now?" "The case will be reopened," Marcus interjected. "If there's evidence supporting Mr. Blackwood's innocence, the conviction could be vacated. There will also be an investigation into Ms. Thompson's actions, both then and now." "And Karen Whitmore's real killer?" Darius asked. Maggie closed her eyes briefly. "There were rumors back then about Karen and Mayor Whitmore's business partner, Thomas Decker. Karen had found financial documents, was threatening to expose something. I didn't pay attention. I was so focused on Shaquille, on my own future." Marcus made a note, his expression grim. "We'll look into it." After the interview concluded, Maggie and Darius stood in the courthouse parking lot, the late afternoon, sun casting long shadows. Neither spoke for a long moment. "I don't know who you are," Darius finally said, his voice small. Maggie flinched. "I'm still your grandmother. I've made terrible mistakes, but everything I've taught you about right and wrong, I meant all of it. I just failed to live up to my own standards. You let a man lose his life while you built a career sentencing others for their crimes," Darius said, shaking his head. "How do you come back from that?" Maggie had no answer. As Darius walked away, phone already buzzing with calls from friends who'd seen the news, Maggie knew some fractures couldn't be mended with apologies. Some betrayals left permanent scars. But, for the first time in 27 years, she felt the weight of her secrets lifting. Whatever came next, professional disgrace, criminal charges, her grandson's condemnation, at least she would face it honestly. At least Shaquille would finally have the truth acknowledged, even if justice had come decades too late. As she got into her car, her phone lit up with a text message from an unknown number, a hospital room. Shaquille was out of surgery, stable. At the bottom of the message was a single line, "He's asking for you." Maggie started the engine, turning toward the hospital instead of home. The road ahead was uncertain, the consequences of her confession still unfolding. But for once, she was moving toward the truth instead of running from it. She only hoped. It wasn't too late for redemption. For Shaquille, for their shared past, and for the woman who had spent half a lifetime hiding from her own reflection.